Poor Judas. He, as the Bhagavad Gita says, brooded on sense objects. He brooded on money in that case. And it led him in that downward spiral towards delusion and loss of the spiritual life. As an aside, Yogananda said that Judas was liberated in the 20th century, so it took a while. But he was, if I remember the story correctly, he became a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. And he still had this funny thing with money, but in that incarnation, he served with money. He raised money for that ashram. And the story, as I remember it, is that a couple of other disciples were teasing him about, how he felt about money. And Ramakrishna said, don't tease him. And so he was liberated, and the way he got liberated was by taking that tendency to grasp and be attached to money and flip it so that he was serving with it. So he made it. Poor Judas. But I wanted to share with you something that, for one thing, this beautiful passage of the Gita is so instructional. It's very important in our spiritual lives. For one thing, if we feel anger towards anything, trace it back. What desire is being thwarted? It's very illuminating to do that process and to go, ooh, did I really want to be attached to that? Did I really have that desire? And let it go. And the anger goes with it. So anger on the spiritual path, it has been rightly said, if you feel anger, you have a long way to go. So it's very humbling to remember that. And whenever there's that flash of anger, trace it back. Okay, what desire do I have? It's usually the ego. Let it go. And the anger will be gone with it. Well, I wanted to share something, which is that Swami took this passage from the Gita, and which is how devotees fall, how they get caught and get into materialism and delusion. And Swami gave us the ascending path, how we come out of that. And he says, when one concentrates on spiritual ideals, one feels increasingly attracted to them. From this attraction grows the desire to live by them. The desire to live spiritually develops into an intense yearning for God. Such divine yearning flames to impatience with anything that will prevent one from realizing God. From this impatience with lesser realities arises total absorption in the consciousness of God. From such absorption ensues forgetfulness of the senses. From sense forgetfulness arises indifference to worldly modes of thinking and behaving. Estrangement from worldly consciousness results in the complete annihilation of delusion. So you see, it all begins with focusing on spiritual realities, which is why Ananda exists, to remind us of the reality behind all the delusion of materialism. Another thing that Swami and Master have said is that people get so attached, like Judas did, to money, to worldly things, and the the silliness of that is that material things don't love us back. We give all this attention and focus and devotion to that beautiful car that we want to buy, or the new couch, or the new dress, or the whatever it is, and it doesn't love us back. Whereas in spiritual realities, the least offering, the least desire to want to commune with God, the least desire to serve, God responds with so much tenderness and so much love. God is waiting for us to turn our cell phone dominated minds for even a moment to Him, to look to Him and to care and to want to commune with Him. I had this experience in my own life to illustrate this, and this happened, many, many years ago in the mid-'80s, and I had been working with the music ministry at Ananda Village, and I was asked to be the choir director on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Some years before that, Swami had written the oratorio music, and so I taught all the pilgrims the parts for the oratorio songs, and then we went to the Holy Land and performed them in each of the each of the shrines where Swami had been inspired to write these songs. So it was a wonderful experience to go all over the Holy Land singing. And then we went to Italy, where we had a very fledgling Ananda work up in the mountains near Lake Como. Someone had lent us a summer house, and it was winter, so it was very cold there. But we, visited this, after visiting the shrines in Assisi, where St. Francis lived, we went to Como. And in Como, freezing cold, November, December, Swami said to me, "Nirmala, I think you should stay here and start the music ministry in Italy." I was horror-stricken. This was my first trip out of America. I'd never been out of America before, and these people didn't even speak English. I thought, how can I survive here? And it's freezing cold, and, I had a whole list of, oh my God, I can't do this. And, but I was being asked to do it, and I felt that God was asking me through Swami. They needed music. They needed his music. So I sort of stiffened my upper lip, and I decided, okay, I would do this. I remember seeing Swami off at the airport. All my friends were leaving. And I was crying, tears running down my cheeks, and Swami said, "I don't know what's the matter with you. It's a civilized country." So we had no money. We couldn't even afford to buy eggs or butter. I remember we had these little loaves of bread that were about this big. We called them torpedoes. They were so hard and, heavy. And that's about all we had to eat. I remember we had a big jar of jam, which was mainly sugar. So we were living on bread and sugar. And everybody sort of gradually puffed out, with that kind of diet. We all gained weight. It was just a time of tapasya, sacrifice. And so my job was to start the music, and I started a little singing group. There were 5 of us. And we, sang Swami songs, and we translated them into Italian. Italian, it was about 30 words to 6 words of English. So we were rattling off these songs, trying to get all the translated words, and it was just ridiculous. But we got an engagement, and this was, again, by this time it was summertime, up in the mountains of Lake Como. And we got an engagement singing Swami's music at the little town was called Veglio, at the Veglio Blood Bank. This was our big debut. And these little villages up in the mountains, there were not very many people, and they were kind of spread out villages. So the engagement was at nighttime. And they had really, really bright lights blazing at the stage. Well, you know what that means. Every bug within a 5-mile radius was drawn to those lights. And we got up there, and they introduced us. We were such a strange thing to them. They said, they don't eat meat. They don't drink alcohol. They don't have children. But they sing, so we're going to hear them sing. So, and that wasn't all true. I mean, we have children, but anyway, we were just this complete anomaly to them. But we got up there and we sang, but we were covered with bugs. They went into our eyes and our nose and our ears and our mouth and got down our shirts, and we're trying to be very calm and centered with all this attack of bugs everywhere. That was the Veglio Blood Bank. They were sucking our blood. They weren't. It was a crazy experience. So I was there in Italy, and after about 1.5 years or 2 years, I was back at Ananda Village, and I had no money, no job, no place to stay, and I'd been gone all that time. So many of my friends were in other colonies. They weren't even at Ananda Village. I was pretty much bereft. And I remember through a series of miraculous experiences, one of which was a friend and I were having dinner, and I told her, I got a job working in town, but I'm living at the farthest point away, the seclusion retreat, and I didn't have a car. I was telling her, how am I going to figure this out? And she reaches into her purse and she gets out her checkbook and she says, how much would you like? And she wrote me a check for $5,000. Things like that happened. And after, a few months of being at Ananda, I looked around. I had a car. I had a place to live. I had a job. I had friends. And even more than when I had left. And I thought to myself, this is through trusting God and loving God and wanting to serve Him, even though about the best I did was the Veglio Blood Bank. But still, I cared and I wanted to serve Him. So even if what He's asking you to do is to be patient and loving with that person who's made your life miserable, or to have more compassion towards someone who's not a good person in your life, no matter what it is, or if it's moving to a foreign country that you really don't want to live in, whatever it is, see it as an offering of love, and God will turn it into bliss.
That aspect of needing to be patient is an interesting one, and it reminds me of something that happened to me right around the time that Nirmala was moving to Italy. This topic today, why devotees fall, I sort of jokingly suggested during the purification ceremony earlier this morning that one of the reasons they fall is that they're not looking where they're going, but which can be literally and perhaps figuratively true. In my case, it was both literally and figuratively true at around that time, because I was working in construction, and I went up on a roof in November, and it happened that the north side of the roof was icy. The south side of the roof was wet, but it was not slippery particularly. So I climbed up the south side of the roof, went over to the north side of the roof to finish working on whatever I was doing, and found out that the sun had not hit that side. It was icy, and I went shooting down the roof like a ski slope. And one has choices in life, and sometimes the choices that we have don't seem like much of a choice. In this particular case, I was going off the roof. There really was not a lot that could be done about that, as I figured out. You know, those little moments, it seems like it lasts 5 minutes. It lasts about an eighth of a second, or 1.2 seconds or something like that. Didn't take me long to get off of the roof, but as I realized, as the time sort of dilated and the realization hit me, I am going off the roof. There is nothing that's going to stop me from going off the roof. Spontaneously, this whee came out of my mouth. And, it was, and what it was is it represented, I'm going down. I can go down unhappy, or I can go down like this is a big adventure, what's going to happen here? And I am convinced that helped on some level. I never studied formal martial arts, but I have to think that maybe some spontaneous little martial art thing kind of happened right in there. I passed through some floor joists, didn't end up singing soprano. The tools didn't get caught. I did twist my ankle, and I ended up on crutches for a while. But it was interesting because at that time, there was another little drama playing out in my life, and it wasn't so little actually, but I realized that Divine Mother was basically saying, time out. It's time to take a little time out here. And I somehow had the intuitive sense that, this is going to take a while. I mean, I had a twisted ankle, I was on crutches, hobbling around for several weeks, and then, slowly kind of getting back up to speed. It did take a couple of months. But the important thing is that at the time, I had to develop the patience to realize that, sometimes when we fall, it's not just this unmitigated disaster. That there is a message, there's a meaning to it. Yes, it is helpful to look where we're going. Yes, it is helpful to develop the insight to realize that there are implications to where we go. Even if we are looking where we're going, realizing that the roof is icy, and if you put all your weight on it, you're going to go shooting down it, that's an insight, that's an implication that I had not grasped at that point. But in a broader sense of life, have you ever watched, there are people in this world who have achieved fame or success or fortune in some kind of way, and there can be a kind of smugness that comes over people like that. All of us, I suppose, at one time or another, we playing some game or doing something, we win. The success comes perhaps without seeming that there's much effort involved in it, and we wear this kind of smug little grin on our face. Life finds a way of wiping that grin off of our faces. And often it's interesting that this affirmation introspection is connected with the reading, because we have to develop that ability to introspect. And we can introspect about ourselves a lot more effectively than we can introspect about other people until we've done it inside of ourselves, as Swami was suggesting in the reading of the affirmation. It's a lot harder to do that, to understand the lessons that other people are going through, because we don't see that from the inside. It takes a lot of intuition to be able to see through someone else's eyes. But developing that sense gives us a broader vision, a broader perspective. It's not all about the disaster of this moment. There is a message, there is a process, there is a trajectory, a growth that's happening that's broader than just this particular moment. And that period of a couple of months helped me to gather that insight. I read a book. Swamiji read a number, was a very avid reader throughout his life. But there weren't a lot of novelists that he would read. He read P.G. Wodehouse, of course, because he loved the humor, he loved the joyful view of life. But Swamiji also read another author, Marie Corelli. And it's interesting, as a sidelight to this, the only novel that Yogananda was known to have read in its entirety was one of her novels called The Life Everlasting. And Swamiji loved that book, and in fact ended up rewriting it as Love Perfected Life Divine. And it's a beautiful, both books are beautiful, actually. But there's a different book, and it applies to this topic today. There's a different book that Swamiji read and recommended, and it's titled in a very unlikely way, The Sorrows of Satan. And it's about this whole drama. Her novels were wildly imaginative and very interesting, but there was a kernel of truth. There were veins of truth in them, which is why Yogananda and Swamiji would both read her. And in this story, we learn the story of how Lucifer fell from heaven and sort of how the drama played out in a worldly way in this world. And the story went that when man was created and Lucifer saw that God loved mankind and sort of made mankind this special image, this special creation on the world, and gave dominion over the planet and so forth, Lucifer was jealous. And he said something to the effect that we'll see how he can be brought down. And in the story, he explains this to one of the characters in the story, because he actually has a human life in that story. And he says, you cannot speak untruth in the presence of God. Whatever you say must manifest. And so he cursed himself to live on this planet trying to draw mankind down. Trying to wipe the silly smug off of mankind's face would be one way to say it, but testing mankind, in other words. And here's the interesting thing. He had the blessing, he was given the blessing that if anyone successfully resisted his efforts to bring them down, then Satan himself got to spend an hour in heaven. Fascinating spin on the drama. So he wanted people to succeed, but he had to do his best to pull them down. And we see in our lives that delusion, the influence of delusion and Maya is quite powerful. You know, as children or young people, we may think, guy with two horns. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. You know, it's like, oh, come on. And then life sort of shows us a few things as we land in the mud once or twice, or maybe a whole lot of times. And we realize that we can get attached to things that are not good for us at all. We can get quite stuck in a groove, in a rut, in a circular path that keeps leading us back to the same place. And it's only by learning to look up, it's only by learning to discriminate, it's only by learning to tune in inside, to reach for the light, that we can discover, there's truth within. And there's a lesson in that for us. And so, yes, we want to respect the power of delusion. We want to be aware that it exists. But ultimately, we grow by learning to rise, learning to look for the light inside, learning to introspect honestly. It's a very helpful image in the reading today about how we have to look at our lives unbiased. That's not so easy to do, especially when there are desires involved. And we're looking for guidance, but we're really voting on one side of the guidance. I want your guidance, but I really want it to be this way. I really want it to be this choice. I really want this team to win, or that, whatever it is. And we have to be able to walk the line in the middle. And we have to be able to look at what we actually see and accept it for what it is. And I love the fact that Swamiji said, neither excusing it nor condemning it. We neither excuse whatever faults we see, nor do we condemn them. We say, I accept the reality as it is. Now let's roll up our sleeves and work on it. Now let's actually do something about it. Until we get to the point where we can see it clearly, we can't see where we're going. When we smash into things, or we fall off roofs, or we, whatever it is happens, we bash into the car in front of us driving, or things that we wish didn't happen, happened. I had an impatient moment as an 8th grader, and I decided that the way to address the situation was to turn the key in the ignition of the car. Well, unbeknownst to me, there were these things called stick shifts in cars. They were not all automatic transmissions, which they were in my experience. Well, if you turn the key in the ignition of a car that's in gear, the car will start moving, especially if the engine catches, and it happened to. Or, usually it'll stall out. But in this particular case, my karma aligned in just such a way that the car being in reverse, it actually started to go in reverse. And I stomped on what I thought was the brake, but it was the gas pedal. And I finally got my foot on the brake in time, but not quite in time, and $85 worth of damage happened to the car that I ran into. And that made for a very uncomfortable summer, because Dad got to pay for it, and I got to sort of have it taken out of my hide, in a sense. But it's one of those things. Those are little, in a sense it was little. At the time it wasn't little, it was really, really big. But impatience leads to that kind of lesson. And so we have to learn patience through introspection, would be one way to say it. Take that inside. And I'll just finish by one final suggestion, and this is a huge one, and I'm not going to spend long on it, but we talk often about the need for meditation, and that, of course, is very important, but I'm going to suggest a different thing. We have to learn pranayama. And pranayama is usually defined as breathing exercises and so forth, and those are helpful. But pranayama is much broader and deeper than that. Pranayama teaches us, put your energy where it's supposed to go, and don't put your energy where it's not supposed to go. Both of those things together. Learn to see what's there, not excuse the faults, not condemn the faults, but focus the energy exactly where it's supposed to go. That takes us out of that downward spiral, takes us out of that whole dynamic of why devotees fall, and shows us the path towards realization.